Hello everyone. So today we're going to be talking about protecting your network primarily at home from cybersecurity risks and especially ransomware. A little bit about myself. I'm the CEO of Duo Group. We're a private equity firm based in Silicon Valley and in Las Vegas. We acquire technology companies that have the opportunity to become multi-billion-dollar ventures, but not tens of billions of dollars. So where the VCs start to fall through, we come in and provide secondary financing to companies and build them out to different targets. I also sit on the advisory board of Cardinal Ventures at Stanford, which is Stanford's on-campus accelerator. I'm also an advisor for Google for Startups Accelerator, and right now I'm sitting as CEO of Settle Labs, which is our security company that we're launching. Yeah. Okay. So in this talk, we'll be covering a few items. We'll be talking little bit about cybersecurity, risks from working at home with cybersecurity, some threats associated with cybersecurity, threats specifically to working at home, and what you can do about it. So to start, just so you guys know, ransomware is a huge problem. It's increased a ton over the last few years. Specifically, this year, or last year I should say, there was $20 billion in ransomware damages that were reported. And when we say reported, reported. So this is not including anyone who might be hiding the fact that they had to pay a ransom. And so now ransomware is only one type of attack, but how we should take a look at this is that Colonial Pipeline was the biggest thing in the news over the last few weeks, specifically the fact that the whole eastern seaboard's oil pipeline got hacked and then was shut down due to the ransomware attack. This ransomware attack was paid. It cost $4 million. The money was recovered. However, this is just a huge threat that happens with business these days just to the size of networks. The largest food and meat manufacturer was put down. Insurance companies, Acer, which is one of the largest computer manufacturers, paid a $50 million ransom earlier this year. I also want to mention SolarWinds. SolarWinds was not necessarily a ransomware attack. It was just an infiltration attack that was used to collect data. So code was injected into the SolarWinds code, and data was stolen from the department. Many departments in the United States, as well as private companies, trying to steal their data. So there's just a lot of risk when it comes to cyber. Now, many of you are startups, and the real question is why should you care? The reality is as a startup, regardless of your size, cyber always proposes a risk. So if you just invested $500,000 or $2 billion, it doesn't matter the size, in research and development, and now someone is able to take that from you by hacking into your systems, that's a threat to your business because you spent the money, and now a competitor or someone else, that information gets out there, and now people get to take advantage of your hard work. And the reality is even though ransomware is $20 billion, it's projected that this year alone, there'll be $6 trillion in cybercrime damage, which is huge. And the reason why this happens, and the reason why cybercrime is so large, is information is power. And really what's happened is information warfare has evolved into cyber warfare. So the reality behind these different tools and techniques is all this stuff has existed from the beginning of time. So I'm going to talk about a keylogger. What a keylogger does is records every type you make with your keyboard. And this is a very common type of malware. The idea is to steal your password or collect confidential information. Now, this might seem relatively new, but what happened was this is just an evolution of a historical information warfare technology. So earlier in the 1960s and 70s, the KGB, the Russian intelligence agency, they actually installed malware, as they call to these days, but they ended up placing a computer bar into the typewriters of the United States Embassy in Moscow. And they would log all of the pen strokes associated with that typewriter, and using shortwave radio bursts, they would distribute that information back to the Russian intelligence agency. So a keylogger is really just an evolution of technology that was pretty much created 50 to 100 years ago. And really what's changed is that we've gone from physical intrusion, where you have to steal the physical pieces of paper, to digital intrusion, where you can access people through their networks, which makes it a lot easier to attack adversaries, competitors. And what ends up happening is that this just puts you more at risk, because companies have to now protect themselves from cyber criminals who are trying to attack everyone. Now, how big is this? Well, the vectors that they can attack you with have been growing exponentially since the pretty much start of the digital revolution. To give you this a little bit in context, pretty much everyone today, about 6 billion people, have access to the internet. So 6 and 7 people can access the internet. 20 years ago, it was 250 million. So now with those 6 billion people includes 21 billion devices. And the number of devices is going to exponentially increase with the adoption of IoT. Pretty much every device in your home is now a computer. So what is the motivation for cyber criminals? Well, the reality is espionage is the first one, so state-sponsored characters trying to attack other companies, other foreign adversaries. The other type of hacker is just driven by ego and curiosity. There are plenty of hackers that just try and penetrate different systems, not necessarily to do harm, but just to see if they can. Others do cybercrime for the purpose of vandalizing or destruction, hurting a business that they can attack because they're vulnerable. There's also ideological and political attacks. An example of this is Anonymous, who attacked the banks just to be able to show that they've caused damage. Another key one is revenge and retaliation. And then finally, financial. Now, financial is the primary motivator for most cyber criminals, because there is the benefit for them in the terms of finance. And how they do this is by trying to steal either your business financial data, customer financial data, sensitive personal data that you may have. They might want to steal customer databases or lists. They might also try and take over your IT infrastructure or services, because if they can control, as an example, one of your servers, they can now use that server to put an attack on someone else. And finally, they might want to steal your intellectual property. And what's really enabled this is the rise of cryptocurrency. Beforehand, the ability to pay for a ransom was relatively low, but with the rise of cryptocurrency, the anonymity and the ease of adding a wallet on the blockchain that a payment can go to has increased ransomware as one of the biggest threats facing businesses today. Now, what makes ransomware specifically so dangerous is the fact that ransomware is both financially motivated, it's also destructive as well. So at the same time of someone profiting on it, it's also causing damage. And it really is a balance of all of these different items in terms of motivation, and really pretty much checks boxes for most actors. You could see someone whose ego is involved. I would like to try and hurt somebody, so they're going to go after somebody, and then now they get a financial gain out of it, plus they get their ego, plus they've damaged your business. So there's a lot of damage that's caused by ransomware, and ransomware is really one of the few things where everyone is actually hurt the most because you might be locked out of your data or some other consequence to the ransomware itself. Now, we've been talking about risks, specifically the fact that you have external threats, specifically there's the cyber criminal out there, but the reality is that the biggest threat is actually internal. And this threat really comes from the employees that are working at your business. So the rule to take away from this is treat your employees well so that they take care of you even when they're leaving. A perfect example of this was actually Google. One of the executives at Google pulled a little less than 10 gigabytes off the hard drive and started a startup in the autonomous vehicle space. That company was then acquired by Uber, and this was actually used to steal Google's intellectual property around driverless cars. After this was all said and done, the executive went to prison who stole the data, and Uber had to pay $250 million in actual damages to Google with the guarantee that they wouldn't use their technology. So even though we've been talking about ransomware, and earlier I said as an example, Acer paid a $50 million ransom, in terms of damages to a business, Google was damaged for $250 million. So the damage from internal threats is actually way greater than from external threats. So now what does this have to do with work from home? Well, with COVID, everyone has been working from home, and their work has actually changed, and the working environment has changed because of the coronavirus. And so IT professionals used to only have to protect the home office and the network. And yes, this got more complicated over the last decade with everyone having their mobile phones, but people would generally use the company Wi-Fi. It was actually generally easy to secure your home network, especially at the office. What's happened with everyone working at home is now every home is a place where a company can be attacked. You have 500 employees, 300 work from home. Now you have to defend 300 different locations. And really what this does is it makes cybersecurity everyone's responsibility while working at home. And really how you deal with this is risk. So there's a lot of risk when it comes to cybersecurity. And the reality is you're not going to be able to defend from everything. When we're talking about how much cyber actually does damage and the type of threats that are there and how many different people are trying to attack, even with phishing or some email scam, it's huge. And the thing that most businesses need to take away from this is that you're just trying to manage your risk to reduce the chance of it happening to you. So the best way to think about this is like a video game. Now, everyone hopefully has played an RPG, a role-playing game, where you have to build your character. Now, if you think of your attack and defense, pretty simple. Well, one's profits and one's costs. Well, it costs money to defend your resources, and if you put all your resources into defense, it's really hard to make money. And if you put all of your resources into making money, then you will open yourself up to attack. So it's always a balance that you really need to take when it comes to your business. And the amount of defense and the amount of how much energy needs to actually go into cybersecurity really depends on the type of business that you have. So if you're running an e-commerce company, you have to be cognizant that you need to protect your customers' credit cards. But the reality is you have a much lower risk than, say, a law firm who has to protect all of its confidential data for all of its clients. So how do we do this with a practical approach to defense? So step number one is never overdo it. So we can always talk about not using technology, but the reality is that never works. What will end up happening as a smart startup is that your inability to adopt new technologies will actually hurt you in the long run. And on the other side, if you try and be too open and you're pretty much scared of technology but use it all, and then you put too many systems in place, you're not really able to really use that technology anyhow. So there is just a real balance to this defense and how to approach it. And so we're going to talk about the common types of cyber attacks that really end up hurting individuals at home. And then from there, we'll go on and talk about what you can actually do on a personal level to go ahead and protect yourself, your business, and your employer from those cyber attacks while working at home. So the first type of attack that we want to talk about is a distributed denial of service, or DDoS attack. What this is that a hacker will use a bunch of different computers to overload, say, your computer or a server, and what that then does is takes down the infrastructure of the company. This worked to very good success a few years back where Amazon Web Services was actually taken down by a DDoS attack. The next type of attack is called phishing. Everyone's probably used to these. This is this email that you get constantly saying that please send us some money so we can send you more. And the reality is phishing is pretty much any type of email type based attack. And 70% of the attacks are phishing these days. The reason why is that it's just so easy to do. Remember how a moment ago I was talking about a device being used or infrastructure being used for another attack? Well, it could be a compromised computer sending you that email today. A variation on phishing is actually called whaling. And this is pretty much using email and the same techniques of phishing, but targeting it towards executives of a company. This generally requires a lot more time and a lot more effort, but the reward is a lot higher. An example of this phishing attack was an Austrian airline supplier parts company was actually a target of whaling, and the executives ended up paying $50 million to a wrong account, which the cyber criminals held, and they lost $50 million for that company, and they both lost their jobs. And so if you're asking, why is this important to me? Well, if you worked at that company, you didn't get a bonus that year, and you don't want to be responsible for hurting everyone in your company. Another type of phishing attack is called the man-in-the-middle attack. Now, when you're communicating with someone online, you usually have just a normal communication where one person is talking to another. A man-in-the-middle is where an actual adversary implants themselves in this communication. And what ends up happening is that if you are you send an email, they receive it, then they send an email to the respondent, and they act as the person in the middle. An example of a man-in-the-middle attack was an actual venture deal that went awry when a person inserted themselves into a conversation between a startup and a VC and was able to convince the VC to wire the money to the wrong bank account. So this ends up being a very large threat, and it's one actually of the easiest to prevent. The thing is that most people don't confirm which email they're sending an email to. And so what hackers will do is they'll buy a domain that instead of having an I, has a 1 in it. So instead of it being the NextRise conference, they would change the .com to NextRise with a 1 and confuse an individual inserting themselves in the conversation. So this is actually one of the easiest type of attacks to prevent, and the easiest way to do it is just double checking who you're sending your emails to. So the term malware has actually become very popular over the last 5 years. The reality is malware has existed since the beginning of time. The Trojan horse, regardless of how you're looking at it, these things and techniques have been going around for a very, very long time. The thing is that malware is kind of a blanket term that's being used these days, and it's actually replacing the term virus. But they generally are used interchangeably, and generally they're now used synonymously with virus and malware. If someone is trying to say we're providing malware protection versus antivirus protection, the reality is that at this point in time, both of those terms are synonymous, and you guys should be aware of that because it's just one of those things that are used to scare you. If we use a different word, we can convince people to do different behaviors. So the most common use of malware is data theft, also called exfiltration. Now, what someone is trying to do is steal confidential information that your business has. So if you're a business and you potentially have someone's passport number or other information, if they can install a malware on your machine to say, send that file to another location, that is how they try and steal the data and then use that data for financial gain. A perfect example of data theft was a malware that was actually installed on a scanning device. So just 6 months ago, a scanner was installed into a business. This business was designed to just scan old newspapers that this business had because they used them for reference. And what they ended up finding out was when they were actually saving the materials onto their cloud device, the actual scanner was actually trying to send the copies of those scans to another country. So this scanner was used and had malware installed on it to try and steal the data from those scanned paperworks. And the assumption was that this device had malware on it, and with people scanning documents at a certain point in time, these cyber criminals would be able to collect sensitive information using these scanners. And so, in general, cyber criminals are trying to get credentials. What they're trying to do is gain access to a username and password to access your email, to access a bank account, to access your company servers, because once someone has access, they can do a lot of damage. So when we think of ransomware, everyone shows this scary photo of a guy in hoodie trying to keep you scared from all the dangerous things out there. This is not what ransomware looks like. Ransomware actually looks more like this. Ransomware looks like the regular guys working in a call center, and usually it's one or two professionals actually installing malware and trying to distribute it, and then they hire people to respond to the emails, and they're pretty much working on really basic computers dealing with emails. So you'll have customer support reps working at a ransomware company in various countries. And so this is what ransomware actually looks like. And the reason why I do this is because I want you guys to know that it's not as scary as it might look. You know, we talk about ransomware and malware and cybersecurity as this big threat, but you have to also look at it with fresh eyes and understand what it is. Because if we constantly are looking at photos like this, we make it a boogeyman, and it's way more dangerous than dealing with the active threats that it is. This looks a lot less dangerous than this. So we think of ransomware as someone just going to their regular day job trying to steal some data from you so they can take $400 from your bank account, and it's a lot easier to deal with ransomware with that perspective in mind. Now, the main tool used by cyber criminals these days is called social engineering. So regardless of the malware or the methodologies are used, malware needs to be installed. Malware needs to be turned on. You need to respond to a phishing email. Regardless of what it is, generally social engineering is being used to collect information and get your credentials. And the reality is us as humans are the weakest link. If I set up 2 secure servers and have them communicate with each other on an encrypted basis, generally that's really secure. What's not secure is what I saw earlier today, which was a gentleman with his phone that looked real scary. It had a 10-digit PIN to get to his phone. But when all of the number is 0, it's really easy to guess that password. So the person was like, tuck, 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 and entered their phone, and it was all 0s or 9s or 7s or some number along those lines. And the reality is that we are the weakest link. A 10-digit code is really not that great if all the numbers are the same digit. So when we talk about social engineering, generally there's 4 major things that cyber criminals are targeting. One is greed. A perfect example of this is the email that says, or a phishing attack that says, oh, I need help leaving a country, but I have millions of dollars. I'll pay you $100,000 if you help me leave the country, but I need $400 to get my stamp because I have gold stored in Argentina. And so this type of phishing attack, as an example, is meant to take advantage of greed. The other one is curiosity. Have you ever seen an email saying, I love you and I miss you? Well, that's really there to get you curious about who's loving me or who's missing me, and anything that could possibly trigger someone's response to click on the email to take a look at it. Another one is fear. A perfect example of a fear-based attack is someone sending an email saying, urgent medical response needed, potential cancer diagnosis. They're going to try and use the fear of you being sick to try and get you to click on an email. And finally, trust. The idea is that someone may actually use trust as an idea to use this. And a simple way, and I'm going to use a non-email example, I'm actually going to use a texting example, is someone sends you a text from a random phone number saying, hey, this is Sanju. This is my new number. Go ahead and save it. And then they'll text you back and forth once in a while, and you think it's one friend, and then a year later, all of a sudden, hey, I'm stuck. I need $100. Can you Venmo me $100 to get out of this jam that I'm in? And you think you're sending your money to your friend, but instead you're sending money to cyber criminals. A perfect example of this is a street interview. We're going to go kind of through this scenario, but this was actually happened on the Jimmy Kimmel show. What is one of your online passwords currently? Person respond, well, it's my dog's name and the year I graduated from high school. Aw, what kind of dog do you have? Oh, I have a Chihuahua Papillon. And what's its name? Jameson. And where did you go to school, by the way? I went to school back in Greensboro, Pennsylvania. What school? Hemphill Area Senior High School. And when did you graduate? 2009. So with all this information, someone could guess at that password. And this was, yes, done as a joke, but you might be saying, well, I would not do that. Well, the reality is you actually already are. By being on social media, you're already providing most of the information that's needed to be able to provide social engineering to you. They know your friends. They know who your uncle is. They know who your family members are. And the moment they are using that information to try and attack you, they're using trust to their advantage. And a perfect example, again, of credentials being used to get information. If someone is able to hack your Facebook or Twitter account, all of a sudden they can get so much more data about individuals in that person's network that they would otherwise not have. And so you might be saying, when you get a friend who says, hey, my email was hacked or my Facebook was hacked, that's actually a threat to you because now the information you've posted is now available for others to use. So at the end of the day, how do we keep ourselves safe because we're working at home? Because at the end, we are regularly, when we're at home, let's be honest, we use social media less than we have in the last year. You know, we watch a lot more Netflix than we used to as well. And so safety comes at a cost. And so the thing is if you're an employee, you should be talking about to your employer, what are the costs to keep your home network safe at home? And many of them will actually pay for you to set up your home network properly so you can protect yourself. The other thing too is to protect yourself and your family, there are also additional costs, and you have to be ready to pay those costs. We've all been tricked into saying things are free, but nothing's actually free. The only difference is we've been giving money or data to corporations to profit on them rather than to cyber criminals. So how you guys need to look at it is, how do you pay to get protection? So a very simple way of it is to look at it just like coronavirus. So we've been talking about malware and computer viruses, but the reality is you deal with cyber viruses the same way you would deal with coronavirus. And it's just with regular hygiene. We wash our hands. We wear a mask. So the first thing we're going to talk about is protecting your passwords. So the most common thing that we've said is people trying to get access to data or information by collecting your passwords. So the first thing, and everyone does it, and I'm a person who falls victim to this too, is don't use the same password. We say this multiple times, and everyone still does it, and I know that that's the case. There's actually great tools out there that allow you to do and deal with passwords. And so I would recommend that you actually have a password manager that actually generates hard encrypted passwords for all of your services. Now, you say, well, I don't like that because I'm trusting another company. Well, we earlier talked about the difference in between really what we would call digital versus physical security. So some of the people that I know that are in the security apparatus, they actually have to change their passwords regularly. And what they actually do is they actually write down all their passwords in a notebook, and then they put it in a safe. And when they need access to those passwords, they open up the safe, and they pull out the notebook. And yes, you're changing one risk for another, but they're more concerned about the password manager than someone breaking into their house and stealing and getting access to that safe. So there's always a balance. The other thing is to use two-factor authentication. I know it's annoying, but validating through your phone and using some type of physical authentication always helps protect you, especially for banking purposes. The other piece of advice that I would make is actually changing your passwords regularly. Because if you do use a pattern-style password, what ends up happening is that over time, computers can actually, using AI, guess what your password is. If your service is your password is google.password.2021, and next year when they hacked it again, it's google.password.2022 or linkedin.password.2018, they're going to be able to guess your password pretty easily as more and more hacks occur. So the benefit of using a strong password plus changing your passwords regularly is going to actually prevent people from doing this. The other thing is also using longer passphrases. So instead of it being dog 2009, the year you graduated, you should make it, I have a really cool dog 2009. So it becomes easier to remember, and it's still associated with your dog, but it's now 20 digits long instead of 8 or 9. And that's actually one of the best ways to protect yourself. So now we're going to talk more about the home. So the biggest threat to cybersecurity, again, is actually the Internet of Things. The reason for this is that thermostat that you have probably doesn't have a password on it, and it can be hijacked and be used for a DDoS attack and can really cause a lot of trouble. So one of the things, the other devices is your smart speakers or your cameras. And the cameras pay very specific threat. You don't have a camera pointed at your safe. So you have to be smart about where you're pointing your cameras. There's cameras everywhere. You have to be kind of careful. The other thing, too, is that if you're thinking of a new password with a smart speaker and you say it aloud as you're trying to come up with it, and you have a smart speaker right there, that's probably not the best idea, too, if that device is still hacked. So when it comes to the Internet of Things, there's a few things that you can really do to make a big difference. And one of them is buy from a trusted vendor. If you are going to buy a smart device, don't buy the cheap one. The reason is that that smaller vendor that doesn't really have the product continuity is going to potentially lead to more ability to penetrate your network through the device. The other piece of advice is actually creating a special Wi-Fi network and getting another router just for the devices in your home. For certain devices, you are able to change the passwords, and for others, you're not. If you are able to change the password, do. The other thing is for that network that you build for all of your IT devices, use a strong password again so it can't get hacked. The other thing you can do, and requires a little bit more advanced IP work and knowing how to configure a router, and if you have a friend who knows how to do this, is that when you're talking to Amazon or LG, you have to go to a specific internet address. And you should know which address that is. You can actually look it up because that's what your device is talking to. And so you can block all the other numbers. And so now your device can only talk to that specific vendor. Finally, limit device access for Wi-Fi. You can actually turn down the power on your Wi-Fi. Most people don't know this. So instead of the Wi-Fi going out to your street or 5 neighbors down, if you limit your Wi-Fi access to just your home, actually provides a lot more security because now people can hack your network from the street. The other thing that's really easy to do is requesting your company to buy you a work hotspot, i.e., just like I have 2 phones, the company phone and my personal one. The company one actually has a hotspot on it, and I use it to go ahead and go on the internet at home and when I'm abroad. So whenever I'm at home, I actually don't use my personal Wi-Fi on my company machine. I actually use this hotspot, and the combination of a hotspot and VPN is a great way to protect your communications with your company. And the reality is this costs 5,000 won, 10,000 won a month. This is probably one of the cheapest and most effective ways as a business or a startup to protect your business. So you're giving your employee an extra $10 a month so that they have a hotspot added to their device so to protect your business. The other kind of risk here is kids. I used to do a lot of stupid stuff when I was a kid, and the internet is a wild place, and kids are constantly accessing things on the network, and that can put your company computer at risk. So if you're on your own network, you provide a lot of benefit to that. And so what we're really talking about is each home needs to have 3 networks. One for your devices, one is your work hotspot, and then one's your home Wi-Fi for all your friends and for the family and all your personal stuff. Now there's computer security. So what do you need to do for computers? Well, put an antivirus on it. Microsoft actually has its own antivirus, by the way. They're not allowed to pre-install it on your device. All you have to do is turn it on, and you'll be way more effective at defending your computer from risk. Always update to the latest OS. Also update other softwares. And if possible, encrypt your hard drive so people can't have access to your data without a password. Another cool trick that you can do is when you turn on your laptop, usually you have to create an account. And usually that's an administrator account for your personal use. What you can do is actually create a separate account that doesn't have administrative privileges to go ahead and use. The same thing is the same type of account you would use or let your friend use. So only when you need to install software do you have to log into the admin account, which also puts a buffer between you and adversaries in terms of clicking on something by accident and hitting yes and install and now having malware on your device. The last thing is always put a locked notebook down, and if you have a screensaver, don't make it a picture of your family. Have a password that turns on whenever the screensaver gets turned on, and if possible, put a privacy screen on your computer. The last piece of advice that I provide for you personally is to actually have your own banking laptop or tablet. And the reason for this, and this is not for buying stuff online, but the idea is now you need this device to conduct banking. You put the browser on it that's safer. Now it's only being used for that. You can prevent access to hitting the internet other than your banks. And so by having a device specifically for this, it is more effective. And these days, I actually do recommend a tablet because when you're talking about banking, working through the mobile apps is more secure than a browser. So, a few more tips. Pretty much, it's actually pretty easy to defend yourself as long as you're being proactive. And the fact that you're just here listening to this probably is 9/10 of it. And the reality is threats really change, but all of this actually stays the same. The reality, again, is that this stuff has been going on since the beginning of time. We talk about Trojan horses. We talk about spying. The only thing is that the access to that information has been made easier. So it makes it more complex. But the things you actually do to prevent them are still just as simple. And so at Settle Labs, what we're currently doing is we actually help businesses design their response and incident response for any type of attack. And how this works is we actually apply the Google Design Sprint methodology usually used to design products and apply it to the cybersecurity realm so that your business actually can have the protection and are able to use a creative and fun way to actually define your cybersecurity protocols and also define the risk associated with it. The other thing that we do is we help with incident response planning and employee education. And if something does happen, we also have incident response teams that help you navigate actually being attacked by ransomware or data theft. And we do that by helping companies acquire cryptocurrency. We also provide volatility protection. I don't know about you guys, but cryptocurrency goes up and down. So it's really actually hard to make decisions associated with ransomware. If your ransomware is 5 Bitcoin, that's very different today than it is tomorrow. What we do is we provide volatility protection. So if you have an attack today and you notify us of that attack, if the price goes up, we'll still lock in that price for your attack so you know how much your board has to approve. The other thing is we don't mark up the price of cryptocurrency. And finally, we provide additional cost savings by saving people up to 90% on the cost of ransomware if they have insurance coverage. So we end up using our pooled resources to float the ransomware risk till your insurance company pays out.